Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jim Clabber, former chair of the MIT Enterprise Forum of New York City, and I'm still on the board, one of the organizers of this event. I also wear the hat of the chair of the Council on Intellectual Property at the New York City Bar Association. So tonight's event is actually co-sponsored by the MIT Enterprise Forum of New York City and the New York City Bar Association. I am going to be collecting questions from the audience, which I'm going to be presenting to our panel later. So I encourage you to use the easiest thing, I guess, is to use the chat if you're comfortable with that. But I'll also be monitoring the Q&A function here. So I am going to turn it over to Ariel Elia, our moderator for this evening, and also a member of the New York City Bar Association. And so with that, Ariel, take it away.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much for having us and for the introduction. Very excited to talk with our panel here about the future of fashion and retail and what has been going on during the pandemic and hopefully what will be happening after. So thank you to the MIT Enterprise Forum, and also thank you to the Fashion Law Committee and the Council on Intellectual Property at the New York City Bar for co-sponsoring this event. So before we're getting started, for some of those of you who might not be familiar, as Jim said, I'm Ariel from the Fashion Law Institute, the assistant director. And if you are not familiar with the Fashion Law Institute, we are a nonprofit headquartered at Fordham Law School, and which was founded by Susan Scafidi. And we're dedicated to the law and the business of fashion. So for students studying at Fordham, we have 12 fashion law courses that are open to JDs, but we also have 2 master's programs, one for LLM students, so for attorneys, but we also have one for people in the industry, our MSL for the non-lawyers. And if you're interested in obtaining more legal knowledge related to fashion, this summer we will continue our Fashion Law Bootcamp. This year we'll be doing it online, so you can join from around the world. And we also provide free legal consultations to designers and to fashion industry professionals through our Fashion Law Pop-Up Clinic. So we look forward to seeing you hopefully again soon. And with that, I would love to give a little bit of a context before introducing our very esteemed panel about the current state of the fashion industry, what has been going on in this crazy 2020 and now entering into 2021. We first start, of course, in March of 2020 with the lockdown and where fashion was deemed non-essential. We had seen many stores that were filled with spring collections, but unfortunately no customers to go in to buy it if they were even allowed. Later on, we then saw the hashtag #PayUp campaign, where a lot of brands were canceling their orders of finished garments, and it was estimated around $40 billion worth of finished goods were not paid for, which left a lot of the garment workers without pay. Eventually, they were able to recoup some of that money, but not all. We then had many retailers negotiating for performance leases based on sales. Luxury brands were removing merchandise from their windows, and eventually in the summer, we saw many of the brands boarding up their stores and their windows. As we will be discussing, a huge shift and rise in e-commerce. For those of them who were already on the bandwagon of e-commerce, excellent, and many we saw were pivoting, scrambling, trying to figure out what is the world of e-commerce. I'm not sure about your closets, but mine were definitely a bit frozen in time with the various seasons. There was suits, stilettos, things like that, that were pretty much had lots of dust on them. But we did have an uptick in more comfortable items and of course, accent necklaces, very colorful, bright blazers and shirts. And we later on saw then fashion businesses vie for the small business administrative loans and PPP. Unfortunately, not all brands were successful in this. We did see a number of brands file for bankruptcy, but we did also see some acquisition of brands such as Tiffany acquired by LVMH, among other brands. And then wrapping up and moving into the end of the summer, moving on, we have the 15% pledge, urging retailers to commit 15% of their shelves to Black-owned businesses. I would like to say welcome to Fashion Week, but it has now turned into Fashion Months as many brands are showing off the typical calendar. So for New York Fashion Week, technically starting Sunday, but we've already seen some of the designers begin to show. And we also see open access from the CFDA with their Runway 360, but we're going to be learning about many other different platforms and digital ways of showing collections. In December, we had luxury brands showcasing the potential of digital runways, with Balenciaga launching its video game, Afterworld, The Age of Tomorrow, and Saint Laurent releasing its summer 2021 collection that was shot on the sands dunes of the Sahara. And for anybody who saw that, I think everybody was envying and really looking forward to traveling once again. So, with the vaccine being distributed and news of LVMH instructing Tiffany employees to be back into the office at least 2 days a week starting March 1st, the resurrection of retail and fashion appears to be in the near future. So, with that, I'm very excited to welcome our esteemed panel. First, we have Nicole Reeder, CEO of Modern Mirror. Please take a look both at everyone's bios on the event page, but also their websites. So many different platforms, technology. I think everything the fashion industry needs is in Modern Mirror. And then next we have Matthew Gurney, who is the managing partner and creative director of Thermal Brands, who has various services of managing, helping with distribution, creative direction, among many other things. And one of the collaborators he has worked with is our next panelist, Rupa Pemaraju, who is founder and designer of her namesake brand. So with that, I will pass it on over to Nicole to tell us a little bit more about Modern Mirror.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for also having me as well as part of on this esteemed panel. Do really appreciate it. So for all of you, I'm Nicole Reeder. I'm the CEO and the original founder of Modern Mirror, and I will show you a couple of visuals to be able to take you on our customer journey and what type of experience that we do offer for end users, so the consumers, but as well as what happens in retail stores as well as online platforms. So as we know, when it comes to shopping, is that no buying decision is final until the try on is complete, whether it's at home or in the fitting room. One of the biggest issues we have out there is one, prior to the pandemic, is 68% of people did not like the fitting room. And now after the pandemic, anywhere from 65% of women and 54% of men are not comfortable going into a fitting room anymore. And with online sales as well, we see anywhere from 40 to 50% of clothing returned. So finding the perfect fit is very difficult, both in store as well as online. And if they don't go into the fitting room, people are only 10% likely to buy. And but if they can get them into the fitting room to try on clothing, they're 70% likely to buy. So this is where Modern Mirror comes in. What we do at Modern Mirror is we create bespoke, high fidelity virtual fitting experiences for both the in-store experience as well as for the online experience. And when we talk about bespoke, what we really mean is that every single experience, when a consumer goes into a store and they step into the 3D imaging system, that whether that's in a very large space, whether that's in a smaller oversized fitting room, every single experience is unique to every brand as well, because it's very important that we create customized and bespoke experiences that really truly represent the brand's identity and ethos as well. And so once the client does step into the 3D imaging system, within 1.5 milliseconds, they are 3D imaged, meaning that we capture hundreds of measurements as well as images of them. And what we do is create an actual 3D replica of themselves in real time. And the accuracy of those measurements is within 0.5 millimeters or less. So it's one of the most highest performing and accurate 3D imaging systems in the marketplace today. Once the client has been 3D imaged and we've captured all of that data of the client, then the client then goes into a viewing area. It might be a VIP area, or they might be given mobile tablet, or they might be given a tablet or on their mobile device, or through immersive 3D holographic displays, can actually start to see the entire collection on themselves in a matter of minutes. And when we mean the entire collection, what we mean is that we actually 3D digitize the collection. So we'll take the actual real garment and we'll take the patterns, the 3D CAD patterns and such, And our team of specialists, our virtual sample makers, actually 3D digitize that actual garment. So here's an example on the left, and on the left is the right is the virtual garment, and it's extremely difficult to distinguish. The reason why we 3D image the garment is because we need to ensure that we get the correct properties, we get the correct fabric simulation as well, the correct fit and the correct drape when it is being simulated onto the person. And this is just an example of the type of detail. So as a close-up, this is the type of texture and examples of the 3D digital garments. So they look extremely realistic and real. And we also work with very complex garments. For instance, like one of the designers, Noe Bernicelli, whose garment, he does a lot of couture work, and everything is hand beaded and hand stitched on his garments. And then our team goes in and actually digitally stitches every single one of those beads on. And the reason why is the importance of digitally stitching each one of those on, again, is to ensure that we capture the correct movement and the correct drape and fit of the garment. So here is just a quick example of one of our models she was 3D imaged in our system. We also captured her motion capture. So this is her walk, and the garment was also draped on her as well. And this really truly shows the movement of the garment and how it drapes and how it will wear as well on that model's body in particular as she's walking. And the most important thing is that we create a very realistic, high fidelity experience that is both for an in-store experience, but as well as for online, because once the client leaves, it's really important that we can then create customized platforms as well that can be embedded into the brand's own digital platforms. For example, this one was custom made for Maria Grackvogel, is one of our clients, and that gives the experience. So it's really truly taking a unique experience or one of kind of experience and creating an everlasting relationship and deepening that relationship with the brand. And that is Modern Mirror in a nutshell. So thank you. And I will pass it over to Ariel. Thank you.
Excellent. So incredible to actually see things that we can still have fittings and things like that, even in a pandemic, and then moving into the digital world. So next, I'll pass it on to Matthew to hear more about thermal brands.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, especially Ariel for hosting and MIT. I am managing partner and creative director for Thermal Brands. Thermal Brands is, in effect, a creative and management agency for brands. And there are really two core sets of clients that we have. Either they're large global brands like Kering, Puma, Intel Gaming, Michelob Ultra, or they're young brands. They're brands that are within the few years old, under 10 million or 5 million in revenue. And we are able to kind of provide both with a series of either creative injections, distribution strategy, everything that basically drives a brand to market after the design has been done. We are not designers. We don't pretend to design, but we do work with young brands as well as larger brands to create creative outlets, activations, experiences, whether it's on the product side or it's eventually on the marketing and activation side. In effect, we've been able to put together activations for product launches. We've done shows for designers at New York Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week. And we've also created a series of fashion-driven experiences around other culturally relevant moments like Formula One or Art Basel or Complex Con or even Kids Con for children. We as an agency focus on 4 core segments. One is fashion, typically the business of fashion. So not just designers going to market, but things like marketplaces, materials, supply chain, as well as new initiatives like sustainability. The second is we work in home and hospitality. So looking at ways to create that hospitality experience richer, more interactive, more engaging. Third is food and beverage. Looked and worked with a lot of young brands that are looking at creating D2C, but in the food category or wellness category on the food side. And then last is beauty. where we've worked with brands like True Botanicals in San Francisco and a variety of others on kind of the wellness beauty story. And what we've found is there are really kind of three core things that we really focus on with our brands. One is really help them design a community. So really kind of figure out what is the ethos of the brand, what is the brand's story. Second is really help them build a business that has predictability. So whether they release one collection, three collections, it's always better when a business can operate predictably and consistently. And that's one of the ways that we do by helping brands manage cash flow, capital infusion, PO financing, et cetera. And then the third is really help them with kind of the bigger creative vision. So how to really push the envelopes of product development, things like prototyping, sampling, range planning, materials experimentation, et cetera. One example is with MIT. I've introduced a client of ours, which is Puma, to the Media Lab at MIT to really focus on discovering a new material for the sole of the running shoe. And that technology and that partnership came together last year. And the shoe just launched about 4 months ago, what they call Zetic. And Zetic is in effect this collaborative partnership that MIT had built with Puma to really design, again, a new, very highly engineered, very specific type of new material science breakthrough. So there's a variety of things that we attack. We attack it with a lot of veracity. But we also, I think, are really very flexible in trying to help our brands understand what issues there are. Many of them came on certainly through COVID, and then being able to react and continue to build and grow these successful young brands.
Wonderful. It's so nice to hear the background behind the designer, the business parts, and also so wonderful to hear that you're working not only with large brands like Puma, but also with emerging designers as well. So with that, I'll pass it now on to Rupa.
Thank you, Ariel, and thank you, MIT, for having me on this panel. And I run a sustainable namesake brand, Rupa Pimiraju. That's my name, Rupa. And I recently moved to New York, and I create a women's wear luxury brand. And I'm just going to share my screen. So we create these products in India, and especially made by sustainable fiber, and everything is natural. So we use a lot of hand techniques and beading when we create these products. And it's all made by real people, real artisans. We try and avoid a lot of machinery products, which is where we could give more jobs to the real people who are in need. That's been our ethos since the time we started the brand in 2012. And we pretty much, our ethos has always been about color, print, and kind of textures that we bring in. And all the textures that we create are either hand woven fabrics, or it could be hand embroidered fabrics. So we created this product, and we kind of wholesale this with larger retailers or smaller boutiques, or at the same time direct to consumers. So that's how we've been doing wholesaling and retailing at the same time. And we also collaborate with different bigger fashion houses, so that are where we sell lower price point, and at the same time bring in more jobs to the people who really require that. So our luxury item could be somewhere between $1,200 to $5,000, depending on the kind of fabrication that we create and kind of beadwork that goes into the making. So that's our brand so far. And yeah, I'll pass it on now.
Wonderful. It's so inspiring to see those beautiful prints and colors. It makes me ready for spring and for everybody to be out again. So I would love to start our discussion now. There's so many things we can talk about, but let's start with kind of an overview of the pandemic, how things were affected. I would love to hear from everybody in, has everybody been affected or different countries uniformly, or has there been regional differences? What have you seen in the work or the brands that you've worked with?
Well, I'm happy to answer. I think that it has certainly affected different countries in different ways. I know that having worked regularly with folks in France, Italy, Spain, certainly they have been hindered by different abilities to produce, to ship, even to conduct meetings and visits. Certainly the cancellation the past year of many in-person events like Fashion Week. For many of us, Fashion Week isn't about going and sitting and watching shows. It's really most specifically about meeting with people to review samples and pricing and substitutes and innovations, and to really talk about opportunities that are in front of us, whether that in front of us means 6 months, 1 year, or 2 years. And I think a lot of that certainly was canceled. And for many of us in the creative space, Zoom isn't a very good substitute. There is, shipping back and forth samples. We have been doing that tons. My DHL bill is through the roof, from shuttling back and forth, different types of materials and dips and dyes and treatments. But I think that, yes, some countries have been able to bounce back faster. And others, I think, have been really, if they're so dependent upon international economies, then they've kind of been trapped. I know that friends who have worked in Canada have had to come and quarantine before, and they've kind of been eating those 14 days up in Airbnbs. So I think that there is a bit of this interest to kind of get back to physical meetings, really for the sense of being able to further the journey of creative. Not just production. I think production's kind of been naturally the countries that produce have been affected, although, they've still been able to ship orders. There's just been more of a lag and a delay of like port delays, et cetera. But it's really that front end creativity, I think, that's suffered the most in countries where they've been isolated and haven't been able to kind of really get back to being part of a global community.
And I'll just jump in and add to what Matthew's saying, in full agreement with what he's just told us. And as well, and from a retail perspective, depending on what geographical, what region stores are in as well, it really depends on what the quarantine issues are as for clothing. As we were seeing during the pandemic, that clothing was quarantined anywhere from 24 to 72 hours, depending on the country or the city or the region and what the outbreak was. And that's really difficult, especially for luxury brands, to have their clothing being quarantined when someone tries it on in the physical store. And another thing I would just add to that too is that in different countries, for instance, like China, we're actually seeing a rebound quite quickly. We saw this back in April when they started, while the rest of the world was going through this pandemic and everything was being shut down, we started to see China open up some of their stores, for instance, like the Hermes store in Guangzhou. And in that single day in April, they made over $2.7 million of people rushing to one of their second largest store in China. And so that's what we're seeing as well as within China, is that they're rebounding back and they're getting back into the physical stores and back into those experiences as well. So it just really depends how the pandemic has affected other countries and regions, and what's also happening with the new strains.
Absolutely. And so how are you observing individuals and brands defining themselves to be unique online in either their dressing or in how they're branding themselves? How have you seen that change?
Well, from everything, well, I'll jump in here is with what I've seen with individuals is again, everyone's heavily getting into Instagram. They were always already in Instagram, a lot of influencers and such. We have seen so much happen with athleisure as well, with us not being able to be out and investing in, we're not investing now as much into business casual wear or, more, I would say dresses and suits and stilettos, as you'd mentioned, Ariel, before. But we've definitely seen an increase in the athleisure wear sector. But in the same token, when we're conducting, I know for our company, from a business perspective, as I know a lot of our team members, even though we're doing Zoom and such, and we're in the comfort of our own homes, is that our team, well, we love fashion. Yes, we're a tech company, but we do love fashion. And so we do like to make sure we do get dressed up for our meetings and present ourselves and such. And of course, it just varies from company to company, but it's what, again, we've seen as well when with Zoom calls and such, is that backgrounds and such is people will display unique backgrounds or they'll blur out their backgrounds and such. So there's all those type of trends that we've seen.
I also think the wardrobe in the sense, like a lot of people have started to dress up mostly this part. Like, they have the top and they have the accessories and, chandelier earrings. I think that's what I've been selling. And I think that's what Zoom requires. And otherwise, yeah, we're all wearing leisure wear and then dressing up with different detailed things. But also it depends from different country to country, because I see when it's a Western world, we always have a different attire for different kind, like, morning and day wear and evening. But coming back from India, we are always wearing relaxed wear. So I feel they have not had that much of an issue in terms of wardrobe change. But otherwise, yeah, I see there's a difference. Yeah.
Matthew, are you about to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much, by the way, on the internet now. I mean, there is kind of just a feasting that's going on from brands. I think one of the neat parts about it is anyone can launch a brand now, and anyone can produce and anyone can take orders. So this democratization of becoming a brand has really kind of seen, if not accelerated itself, during COVID. I do know 2 or 3 friends of mine who launched brands during COVID, and have done, a great job at it. Part of it's because they also have this, almost sitting targets of influencers who are at home because of COVID, and they're able to get a hold of them, ship them a package of free stuff. And within 3 days, you have someone with 1.5 million followers wearing a brand that has never sold anything in its life. And I think that that's really, an annoyingly cool story, because I find it annoying, but I do find it very cool. That's kind of how the world is these days. So a lot of brands, I think, are relying a lot upon that type of accessibility to a high degree. So you have to be careful who you pick, because those are the people during quarantine that perhaps have the highest influence on potential buyers, especially if their retail is limited or their retail stores accessibility is limited. And you also certainly don't want to pick people who maybe have a lot of brands, because then there's dilution and you kind of seem like one of many. So certainly that identity online is really becoming super, super critical, but it is being defined heavily by kind of this influencer versus typical brand spending money on pay-per-click or SEO or ad insertion or things of that nature.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting. Even right before we got on, I was just going through virtual backgrounds, and I noticed now there's even a beta test of you can have lipstick, you can have eyebrows kind of tattooed on. And it's so interesting to see. I see some potential collaborations maybe with Sephora and augmented reality of trying on. We've seen it in Sephora, but a lot of opportunity there. So, Rupa, I've noticed that you are producing these incredibly beautiful dyed masks. Post-pandemic, I think we'll probably be wearing them for a while, but will you continue that? Or are there certain product categories you've expanded into that you'll maintain after the pandemic?
I think masks are not something that we're going to, I think it's going to be there for a long time
Mhm.
because there are a lot of different category of people can't get vaccinated for different reasons.
Mm.
So I see masks are going to be there, and we still have a lot of requests for masks. And I've been selling masks every single day. So I don't know when. I don't have an answer to say whether it's going to stop, but I think that's a new category that I've added in, and it has really changed for me as a brand of how it has helped a lot of people back in India in different communities of how they created the mask. And like adding on to Matthew, like, I mean, a lot of people have created this brand now, like, there are a lot of as a mask selling brand. So there's every retailer now, even though they are in home or accessories or fashion or any different categories, they still have a mask that they're selling on. I think this is a new specialty right now, and I think everybody needs them. And it's so good that it's such at a low price point, you get a good quality mask. So I think, yeah, I see that. And yeah.
Wonderful. So I'd love to dive into the design process. The three of you have such an incredible insight into what is the design process during COVID. Matthew, you were talking a little bit about your DHL bill and how it's through the roof. I'd love to hear about some of the pros and cons beyond a crazy DHL bill. Nicole, I know on your website you talk about reduction in waste through designing in 3D. Can all of you talk about what are the pros, what are the cons, what things you'd like to keep, and what things you're just really excited to get back into the studio and to be collaborating in person?
uh, for me, actually nothing has changed because I live in the US, and my production is based in India. uh, Everything is still on Zoom, Skype calls, and video calls. So all my design processes happen through that. But also at the same time, the time zone is so different that I'm
Mm.
pretty much working in the midnight or early in the morning and things like that. So for me, it hasn't changed, but travel has changed a bit. But I can't go back and stay with my studio and work with them or see the product live happening. So it's pretty much all through video. And like, yeah, the courier bills have gone so high because all the samples have to come back and go forward and things like that. So that's where it's been a little bit of a difficult, challenging moment. But I think as a brand, I've grown in the pandemic. Like as you said, my masks are something that we have created. I think about 80,000 plus masks that what we have created so far. And yeah, that's pretty much what we have created. And also at the same time, it's all through video calls and creating the design and seeing what patterns are created and things like that. So that's always been a challenge when you're not there. But yeah, that's how our process has been so far.
I think from a design perspective as well is we don't, and I know this firsthand with working with some of the designers, for example, like Noe Bernicelli. One he was a lot of all of his couture garments were he used traditional patterns, which were paper patterns. And actually during the pandemic, he actually changed to be doing 3D CAD patterns and 2D CAD patterns and moved into that realm of things. One of the things I think we've seen more of an increase of is virtual sample making, meaning is that there's less physical sample making being done, which is how we can help and assist with reducing the waste is so we're seeing more of that. And one of the benefits of it is that by creating high fidelity virtual samples of the garments, we are then able to showcase them on e-commerce sites, and we are able to showcase them to clients and such before they're even made to one, receive feedback, but two, for marketing campaigns, and three, to even for some brands even look at pre-selling One of the issues that we've always, some brands have been extremely innovative, and with their fashion shows in the past have tried to do see now, buy now. And we've kind of seen this not quite work out as well. But one of the things with having 3D digitized your collection and such is, and also with having a virtual try on application, is now your clients can actually see now, try now, buy now off the runway. So that also will help assist with inventory forecasting for a lot of designers as well in the future, which is helping with their sustainability, achieving those sustainability goals that they have as well for their organizations. And we can start to cut down the waste of the physical, how many physical samples that we do produce when we create the virtual samples. So I think that's been a big benefit of, by working from home, it's kind of forced us to look at that.
Excellent.
I think, well, I agree with Nicole. I think also even in, not just in high fidelity, but lo-fi design process, there's a lot more digital development. There's a lot more CAD rendering than there is cut and sew sampling. I think that for the most part, yes, it's a wonderful thing because it reduces waste. It reduces excess material purchasing. By the way, it also reduces, for many designers, the stress of having to purchase from a cost of goods standpoint materials up front. The other thing I think is really neat is that it also allows designers to simultaneously think while they're designing the garment about visuals for the marketing. And nothing really sells clothes better than marketing. I mean, it's kind of true. So to be able to render your collection with a CMF, colors, materials, and finishes, that you would apply at the same time to visuals, whether it's visuals for the background of the online store, or it's the packaging or the tissue, or it's the storytelling, or it's the social kit. All of that, I think, can be done so effectively online, and it all is so consistent. And so you really just need to nail down the digital color Pantone and not even really mess with the physical Pantone part, because you're really going to get it all displayed. There is naturally the one drawback, which is fit. Not so much fit from a consumer standpoint, which Nicole addresses, but the designer, him or herself, in the process, really wants to make sure the fit is the way the fit is. So you can only render so much on the screen before you really have to go and do a first article of some sort. So it's not a perfect replacement, but it certainly is a much more efficient way to design an initial first collection, and even, as I said, this whole visual set.
Mm-hmm. And I'd love to dig a little bit further into that with the fit. Nicole, can you talk a little bit? You gave us a lovely introduction into your fit system, and that's so nice, because I think most of the time, and there's been so many articles discussing about the return with online things, that you get it doesn't fit even if you measure yourself. How do you foresee that going into the future? Do you see it where you're gathering data and maybe you're giving that back to the designer and saying, hey, you have somebody who wants it and they're in a size, 18, and you're not designing that? How do you foresee the future of that?
No, absolutely. So the type of data that we collect, first, just from an IP perspective, or more of a security perspective, I always like to address this first, because it's people's data, and that is a very sensitive topic, and we take that very seriously. But from a data perspective, is one thing with what we do is we don't provide brands with, when someone gets 3D image, just to be clear, is we're very protective over that client data. We treat it as, we're HIPAA compliance. We treat it as medical data because it's equivalent to it with the amount of data that we receive. With that being said, though, what we're able to do is de-identify the data, and then we can aggregate the data together. And then that type of data, which has been aggregated, we can then provide to the brands, and that can help as well with identifying, and especially in different geographical locations and such, what their demographic is, how things are fitting, how they're not fitting, and what that actual true sizing is. Because it can be difficult to go and measure yourself. We tried this actually in our office as a test, and depending on where I think my waist is and where someone else thinks my waist is completely different, and that will actually especially the waist and the hip area, that is quite a difficult area to fit. And so again, where you take the measurement. So it's so again, with getting that type of data and with that type of accuracy will help brands in the future as well, for those that are interested in wanting to have that data to create clothing that fits that demographic, if that makes sense, and how helps with inventory allocation as well, and sizing allocation and such, and that then spirals into, again, achieving some of those sustainability goals. But yeah, I just wanted to be a little clear with the data piece, is that we don't sell individual data, and as well to bring that point up, is that the client actually has control of their data. They get to say who gets to see it, when they get to see it, if they want to share it, if they don't want to share it, and when it gets deleted. And we make sure that we don't keep it on any third-party cloud servers, and it's under our direct control as well.
You're so good. I know all the lawyers on the Zoom conference right now are so appreciative of everything you're saying right now. And you preempted that question, so I appreciate that. I have a question with looking at, let's see, the kind of going forward. We saw that if they're in a dressing room, that they can have their body scanned. Are you thinking about potentially licensing or creating any software where maybe you could scan from your computer, or is the technology simply not there yet?
No, absolutely. If sorry, cut out for a second. So I just wanted to make sure I understood your question correctly. With our system, it's both for in-store as well as for online purposes. So meaning that you will be 3D imaged within a retail store. We'll capture all of that data, and you'll be able to shop the entire collection on any of the digital platforms on it in the store. But as also, our system is deployed as well for online purposes into the brand's own digital platforms. So they'll be able to shop online as well, which is what we're trying to do, is create that true omni-channel experience. Because especially for luxury brands, and Matthew is the best person to be commenting on this piece of it, but is with, you know, I know there's a lot of people out there right now in the industry, and there's so much talk about physical, no digital, digital only type of thing. For a luxury brand, it's extremely important that they have, there's certain pillars that are really important to their business. And one is the in-store experience. That physical retail experience is very important because it helps them connect with their clients better. Because even though online is amazing tool and everything that we can do digitally, there's so much noise, it's hard to cut through that noise and be able to really build a stronger and deeper relationship with their clients. So when the clients come into the store, they have that better, deeper engagement as well with them, and they can build up that brand loyalty with them. But also pop-ups. We've seen pop-ups over the years, and they're becoming very, again, another one of those pillars. And as we've been talking to brands as well and looking at deploying our system with them, they've been wanting to actually lean into pop-ups as well and test out new marketplaces. But the third thing is digital. They have to have the digital piece. But just to answer, hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, absolutely. And Rupa, on your website, you have the most beautiful sizing chart, which I so appreciate, with wonderful infographics on how to take your measurements. But you also have a lovely note on there that says, if you don't see your size, to fill out a form and to write to you, and that you will work with the customer. Can you explain a little bit about how that process works?
Sure. So firstly, the clothing that we make are all natural fibers, and they're not fitted to the body. So it's all like silk and linen and different kind of soft fibers. So for us, because we cater to the globe, and we are not somebody who are a fitted brand, and for us, it's so important that every body type is addressed. And that's why we have that visual, how to measure and how to give feedback for us. But also the main important aspect there is we don't have inventories. So we don't have a warehouse full of stock, and we don't go on sale. Coming back to that is any customer who orders today, then we ourselves send them a measurement chart to fill out the details for us. and sometime if it's a small or a medium, it's okay. But some people, if they are in between medium and a large, or in between large and an extra large, or they're somewhere in between sizes, that's where a lot of people struggle. And that's why we say measure this is how you measure, and then send us those exact measurements so we create that for them. So far we have our own library of customers measurements, like who has been buying our products since 2012. So we have a customer data with us, and every time they order, if anything has changed in between, we kind of update that and create that for them. And also when I say custom sizes, it's all special sizes, because I think everybody would love to wear color and beautiful things. And I don't think many people find those sizes for themselves. So that's why we create this manual process for them.
Excellent. So now diving into, since we're about at the brink of Fashion Week, showcasing fashion, and it's changed so much. Rupa, to go back to you, you produced a beautiful video for your Desert Rose collection. How did this differ from lookbooks you've created or some of your fashion shows that you had produced in Australia? Were there certain elements that you weren't able to recreate that you can typically in the physical?
I think today we have no physical exposure, especially when garments have to be seen, it has to be felt and, understand the whole textures and how the touch and feel and how it feels on the body. So that's so important for any buyer or a customer. So I think we had to change accordingly what's running in the season. And, it's easier for us to create a video and send it to a buyer or a retailer across the globe, and they can feel how the movement is for the dress and how it drapes on the body. So I think, just getting used to the environment and what supports the business. And I think video is very a great way to represent your brand, and also, discuss the lifestyle of how it is. So I think that's what is in the current trend. So that's what we created. But I think I think that's what is going to run for the next few years. I think so. So yeah.
Excellent. And for Nicole and Matthew, we've seen everything from different avatars with Balenciaga to Yves Saint Laurent creating those incredible digital videos and shows. How are you advising your clients? And Nicole, if you could speak a little bit too, because you have another arm of your company with the digital runways. How does that work, and has it been successful? What are the sticking points?
Well, I'll quickly jump in here and just say again, with a physical fashion show, and I really, you can't replace a physical fashion show. And we've seen this through these past fashion weeks or fashion months, I should say. And this is why we're seeing a lot of the fashion brands and stuff go back to physical as well as fast as they possibly can. And they did the best they could with what we could in the pandemic and such. But with a physical show, it evokes emotion, and there's the storytelling, and it entices the clients, and it's very hard as well to get that off of a video. That being said, we're not out there actively promoting that. We do virtual runway shows. We do offer it just because if there is a designer that is wanting it or looking at it or wanting it for marketing materials, we're happy to do that. For us, with the digital piece is that we truly believe, at least at Modern Mirror, that how important physical is. It's about really blurring the lines between the physical and the digital. It's the digital can enhance the physical experience. There's different things we can definitely do. So I'm a full supporter of physical fashion shows and such. And with saying that, if we really look back and to see who was one of the first pioneers of actually implementing digital enhancements, that would have been Alexander McQueen and his autumn fall show, 2006 show, the famous show where he had the holographic illusion of Kate Moss. And I actually spoke to a reporter a few weeks ago from Forbes, and she said she actually attended that show and she was in absolute tears. It was that beautiful and incredible. So again, that's what I mean about it elicits it, and it brings out and evokes emotion and such, and sometimes that's very difficult to get from a digital perspective. So again, we don't push that piece of it, but we offer that.
Absolutely. And Matthew, in the meantime, during the pandemic, how has it worked for your clients? I know there's some brands who've taken a break and are rethinking when they're showing and how they're showing. How has it worked for your clients?
Yeah, it's we've supported them largely on the film side.
Mm.
So their fashion shows, or what we now really just refer to them as presentations, um, have been less about, the catwalk and more about a storytelling moment. You also probably saw, I guess it was a spring summer 21 Gucci collection of short film. I would say that many of the designers that we work with, like Who Decides War or Murder Bravado, and others like Rude, have been shooting short film as part of their presentation, largely in part because A, the CFDA for the longest time would acknowledge young designers. And two is that there's a bit of cost prohibitiveness to getting into a traditional catwalk, a runway type of build out. So they basically would take 23 looks and they would hit the Berkshires, and they would shoot themselves at haunted castles in the Berkshires. And that one of our brands did that this past season. And it's a very, very compelling story. I think that's why a lot of the more thoughtful presentations of runway in the last year have been those that were not indeed held down runways. So whether it was Vetements or maybe it was ERD in the McDonald's in Paris, whether it was Jacquemus's Wheatfield. Again, it was not so much about the traditional walk, but more of the visual storytelling moment. So we've been all over that. Like that's basically, spending more time on, can you produce video, than looking at people who are going to find sites and, put together catwalks and the rest of that stuff. So, and also, by the way, you don't need to schedule that. That video is archival, and it can be monetized and chopped up and used in so many different ways. So it ends up being a much more impactful, I think, presentation. Again, the need to reconvene for me is always about the ability to continue building and innovating in the community. That's what I think is so important about Fashion Week. It's not specifically the show moment, so to speak.
So when we do go back to in-person and we have Fashion Week and in-person runway shows, do you think that people will continue to produce films and videos? And if so, how do you create or attempt to create kind of that energy, that feel 5 minutes before a show's about to start and everybody's connecting and chatting and whatnot? Is that possible digitally, or is it just one of those huge challenges?
Well, I mean, I do think I certainly, there's no substitute for physical chemistry. So I do feel as though that will certainly take place. But I'll also point out that, the concerts that took place during COVID created a lot of energy with, for instance, Travis Scott in Fortnite. I mean, the Fortnite buzz itself is physical because it's physical gaming and whatnot. But then to include a concert embedded into a community that is so rabid, let's say, the esports and Fortnite players, was such a rich, what I call unexpected delight, where you don't necessarily expect that something like this would come together. And I think that perhaps the physical shows of the future won't be as predictable, but there certainly needs to be some moment where people are able to see each other and detect chemistry and intrigue, and that's certainly best done physically. But I do, again, without contradicting, I still think there's plenty of development opportunities in digital to create energy and create movements. Maybe it is live streamed, for instance, which, by the way, is how UFC and big fights are so crazy, is that the energy does get created over the video, like the Super Bowl, for instance. But to have a delicate balance between the two, I think, is what we'll continue to all hone in on over the course of this next recovery.
Absolutely. And I think if you look too at the Chinese market with their live streaming, just doing some research and looking into that, it's incredible what their influencers are doing and how they're really bridging that gap between the physical, the digital, creating some sort of interactive elements. So I think that that might be another thing too, to add that in with live streaming, but then maybe going into the store, things like that. Nicole, you also have another element of the digital model, that if you're a physical model, you want to be digitized. So brilliant with models not necessarily being able to travel here and there. Talk us through that and where you see the future of that going.
Absolutely. Actually, it was interesting because I never thought about digital models. We always were hiring models, for example, for marketing materials and experiments, scanning experiments, all sorts of stuff. And it was actually a few modeling agencies had reached out and approached me, and they said, we're going through a difficult time. And this was prior to COVID. This is all pre-COVID issues. And they said, the market has definitely changed. It's much more difficult. The demands have gone up on models as well. And what a model might get contracted out for, even say 5 years ago, what they're getting contracted out for now and expected to do is a lot more. And that's part of because we have all the online and digital platforms, which are fantastic, and the Instagrams and such. But now, rather than a model only having to try on 5 or 10 garments that day and be photographed, they're expected to have 30 or 40 and such. And so it's getting very difficult as well. And people, because there's so much that now digital content that brands have to produce, it gets expensive. It ends up getting expensive. And so they don't really have the budget. They have very good budgets prior to COVID, but their budgets get stretched the more and more they have to do this. So there's this bit of this issue. And then when the pandemic came in, of course, it made it very difficult for people to be able to photograph their models or have their models filmed, especially in the early stages. So I know there was designers that were sending their products to their models, and the models were wearing them and filming themselves in their homes on a catwalk. So we've seen all of those amazing type of the filming and such. But when it comes down to it, is there is an issue when it comes to the modeling agency and the models. And on another token, we are seeing people create digital models and more fiction models, if that makes sense, which is absolutely brilliant. But at the end of the day, I look and I go, what are we doing to our actual industry? What are we doing to our models? What are we doing to our fit models and such? And fit models will always be very important. Fit model is very different than a model for a marketing campaign or for a runway show and such. So there's an importance there. And so what it really came down to was, well, why can't we digitize models? Why can't we have them be 3D digitized? Why can't they have their own profile? Why can't they not be licensing their digital profile out to brands? And then the brands can be changing their hair color and working with CGI artists as well on changing hair and changing makeup. And those are things that we do internally ourselves for different programs. But I'm saying this now, what's happening is that we've now transformed the modeling industry quite a bit, where if the model basically gets 3D image, and now they're licensing their own versions of themselves out, if that makes sense. So it's, again, assisting the models and the modeling agencies with finding a different revenue stream that's recurring, that is also continuing to make sure that we keep that industry up and going, but it also is moving forward in this digital world that we live in.
Excellent. And since it is MIT, we have to ask about the intellectual property, the patents, certain protections. How are you protecting all these incredible things that you're creating?
Well, with our avant-garde fitting system, that's our virtual fit experience, that's what we call it, is there are certain technologies that we have used from the marketplace, and those are not patentable, but it's all the advancements we've made on those type of systems, as well as any of the integration and software. So that is our IP. So we have filed provisional patents and such. And so we've been working with our lawyers through that piece of it. So it is, yeah, but when it comes down to, for example, we don't have ownership or copyrights or IP or anything when it comes to the brand's designs and such. We have a secure platform that the brands, that is customizable for the brands, for them to be able to upload their own patterns and inventory and information and such, which is very secure, so that our virtual sample makers can actually work with their design team on digitizing that collection for them and working back and forth and creating markups and annotations and such on as our virtual sample makers are creating these digital garments. So it's really wonderful and helps this process. But again, going to kind of an IP thing is making sure for us as well as I kind of go back to the security pieces. We have to make sure that that IP is very, we secure that IP for them. We really protect it because if that ever got out, that would be very tragic and horrible. And that, so the same token as we have really looked at the crown jewels as well that we have access to, which is the brand's IP as well as the client's IP and their data and how we protect that. So.
Absolutely. So looking into retail now, my first question I want to pose is to Rupa. Did this change during the pandemic? Did this change how you sold your garments at all, or have you always been online?
No, it's changed quite a bit. Like when we initially started, when you said, summer range was all in stores, and after that, it's changed a lot. So it's the same thing when we actually created fall winter 20 is what we were selling into the retailers, wholesaling that to the retailers. And obviously it was in the very early stages of COVID, like in early last year in Feb and March, and the buyers were not responding, and we had a really big gap there. And we had already, we created the samples, we've done the lookbook, and obviously we were expecting orders on them. So that kind of totally froze, we didn't know how to sell that range. And it was a pretty a different situation, like never had seen that before, or but we didn't know what we were looking forward for, and if we're even getting orders. Because for me as a brand, we have a lot of artisans based in India who, only when we could give them jobs is when they could create these products. So it was a different situation for us. So, and yes, we could not complete as many orders as what we needed for fall. And that's when we started to create masks. And then it kind of changed the whole plan of how the retail started to buy this amazing accessory of face mask. It wasn't like a great news, but then it was kind of protecting a lot of people and what they really need. It's not just a medical mask, which is just a basic mask, but something which is an attire friendly, which they could use. So I think that's how we kind of changed and started selling those. And I think it also went into wholesale, and it also went into retail and e-commerce.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And as we saw that fashion was deemed non-essential, we saw the closing of many brick and mortar stores. Post-pandemic, where do you see that? Where do you see the negotiation between maybe a retailer trying to determine should we open up our brick and mortar again, have human interaction, or strictly staying e-commerce? Where do you see the future of brick and mortar retail and e-commerce?
I think e-commerce is something that would run throughout, because it's also profitable for a brand, because you're not wholesaling into a wholesaler. And one, you don't have overheads for your building and costs and employees. But at the same time, you have a lot of different disadvantages and advantages, like people can't see the product, they can't understand the fit. But I think with this world, the climate what we are in, the retail, the wholesale, and especially e-commerce is much better for brands like us who are creating exclusive range and not mass producing them, but it's more exclusive. So for me as a brand, I think I would still stick to e-commerce and build on that and make it more accessible, and at the same time more like when you walk into a store, what's the experience? I would like to give the same thing on my e-commerce. So that's what I'm trying developing. Yeah.
Excellent.
I think that D2C is a wonderful tool for young brands. It is very capital efficient. It allows you to cut lots of hassle and lots of cost out of bringing a collection to market. But I think D2C only gets you so far. And I think it only gets you to maybe 2 years. And I know that because of my involvement with brands like Nadam Cashmere in New York City, or True Botanicals, or Rowing Blazers. And that is after 2 years of really some amazing growth, um, they realized that there's just a better opportunity to grow recurring revenue if they're able to create that community. And that community is more than selling cashmere at great prices. It's about cross promoting other aspirationally relevant brands in their space. It's having people come by and tell stories. It's about the cup of coffee. It's about, for instance, what I call dwell time. How much dwell time do you have in that space? And I think that it's not so much that retail is, shut down and it's going to be shut down. I think it's also the properties, the revenue models of the properties themselves will never be the same, where they're going to go get 10-year leases for retail. I know that Rupa and I, for instance, had looked at Showfields. Showfields is a very interesting model. It's a 90-day minimum. If they've got traffic like they do in Miami, which is 600 to 1,000 people a day in Miami and Showfields on Lincoln Road. That number, by the way, 600 to 1,000 visitors in Showfields, Miami Beach, is 6 to 8 times more than traffic on Fifth Avenue today. So again, if you're in New York City on Fifth Avenue and you're only getting 100 or 150 people a day, certainly retail will make you pause if you are on a 10-year lease. But if you can get a 90-day lease and a model like Showfields, and you're going to get 1,000 people a day for 90 days as a young brand, there's a lot of opportunity that you at least have to kind of tell your story. Whether Miami's the right market or not is not necessarily what we're talking about, but just a retail versus D2C. So I do think that having retail that understands kind of the value of community is a big thing. The other is frankly, multi-brand retail needs to understand also that they can sell seasonally delayed product. This whole thing like let's keep up didn't really work well. I think that some of the brands that I worked with were actually able to survive because collections they sold into fall winter 20 were able to be moved out into spring summer 21. And that's because these wholesalers were willing to do that. They understood it. They didn't want to cancel orders. And that means the retailer down the line has to also be cognizant that this is also about a community. It's one season. Maybe you're combining 2 seasons into one season, but that's it. It's an anomaly that is great for the community, and it's great, most importantly, for the designers that have already built these collections. So multi-brand also, I think, has a unique point of view in retail that also they kind of need to adjust to survive.
Excellent. And looking then we've noticed, of course, with the pandemic, how important human interaction is. We'll get that in brick and mortar, but how will we get that in e-commerce, if you can answer that? I know there's a ton of data companies who are looking at clicks and interactions. Nicole, have you seen that in any of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it is difficult to get that human interaction when online. However, one of the things I know that has been really popular, which has been coming up, and as you had mentioned too, is the live selling, which is what China's doing as well. And that is where, as you'd mentioned, is an influencer is going in, they are showcasing that store, they're trying to bring the client from online, and that try to create a community as well around that piece of it, around that store, and so the clients can then who are watching and dialing into this can start to purchase garments as well. So which is what is called live selling. So we're starting to see some of that. China's done a brilliant job, as we've mentioned already. We're starting to see a little bit of that and experimenting with that in the Western countries to see if that would really work and that if that culture will adopt. But as kind of going back to what Matthew says, I'm in full agreement. It is difficult to there is that community feel. And with brands and stores and such physical experiences, those will evolve, and especially for the digital tech savvy clientele that really want to see these digital experiences in store as well as online and have that true omni-channel experience, we will see that. But and we'll see the stores evolve. But from the sense of creating that engagement, that's one of the best examples I can give is how amazing China's done. So it's great that we've got brands as well looking at experimenting with things like that in order to try to help build an online community. One of the things as well that we know with some of the brands that we've been working with or discussing our system with is they've creating apps now, for example. Now, this might not be connecting one consumer with another, but they're trying to connect their sales personnel in store to their online client as well and keep that connection and deepen that relationship. So the brand, so for example, some of Caring's brands have this where they have an app and they know the sizing and the preferences of their client, and they're able to try to suggest garments, which is fantastic. So it's again building and strengthening that community. And one of the things that we were approached about as well is saying, well, can you deploy your technology onto our app? And so that we can now not just give them not just tell them what we think would be best, but we can actually show them, maybe playing dress up with them. Really not maybe dress up, but trying to show the client is really how the clothing would look, even if the client hasn't had time to even look at the new collection. So, again, trying to build a community online through those type of platforms.
Excellent. So more licensing of technology, more agreements, and of course, more lawyers that need to be involved and technologists and things like that. Before we get to some of the audience questions, a topic that is super important as we've been discussing more and more is ethics and sustainability in the fashion industry, and I think kind of a common theme. Rupa, if you could please talk about, since the start of your brand, I think ethics and sustainability has been at its core. There's so many ways that you are incorporate those aspects. Can you tell us a little bit about a few of those?
When we created our brand, the most important subject was about human sustainability, how we support each other and how we kind of create jobs for them. Like obviously artisans are mostly uneducated, and they can't get jobs like any other people, like different sectors. So uh, uh, the poorest of the poor people, where either they have to beg or they have to get into different kind of sectors where it's not healthy or not right in the sense. So for us, that was our main idea when we created this brand, of how we kind of create these jobs for them and help them sustain their beautiful skills. That it could be hand weaving, it could be hand embroidery, it could be pattern making, or it could be stitching. So it's all of these kind of combined together. We wanted to create a community who could create these still beautiful product, luxuriously created product in the slow process. We try to avoid as much as machines, because we wanted to give more jobs to them and still be able to create that luxury product and create a brand and be supportive for each other. So that was the exchange that we really wanted to happen. And but it didn't happen just in one season or anything, but it was something that we learned over the years, and how we kind of created this more in a sustainable way and still be able to wear this product for as many years as possible and still pass it on to the next generation. So it's pretty much like our saris that we wear in India, where it's hand woven silk or hand embroidered beautiful fabrication, and we kind of preserve that. And I have a lot of these products from my grandmother, and passed on to me. And so I feel the same when our product is worn, and how we can pass it on to the next generation and still be beautiful, and still the products and the fibers are still 100%. So that's the kind of ethos that we wanted to form. And that's how this sustainability came on place, and human sustainability, and how we can protect this each process.
Excellent. And also within your brand ethos is collaborating with so many artisans, not only Indian artisans, but many other, excuse me, artists, painters. Can you talk about, in a world where there's so much misappropriation, you're doing it correctly? What are you doing as far as pay, collaboration, representation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean, especially in underdeveloped countries, we all feel, um, I mean, I have felt that personally as well. Like when I show this to a buyer, they think, okay, it's made in India and it could be made much cheaper product, or it could be even, and the kind of negotiation happen process, which I feel I feel really sad about that situation. But then I wanted to make that a process where how luxury is created and how it's created in the right way. And for us, that became a most talking point, and going back to our artisans and creating that and collaborating with different artists was our main ethos. Like our first collection was collaborated with Australian Indigenous artists, where they created this beautiful painting, and it was so special for them because it was something of their own. It's their own lives. Stories or ethos, and which that they kind of formed that into a painting. So we wanted to bring that back into textile and create a product out of that. So that exchange happened in a good manner, that where we kind of share the profit that goes back to the artisans, and we had a certain percentage that we give back. And it wasn't something that we would buy the product, but it was an overall package of how much of a profit we give back to the artisans. So it's the same process of how we kind of give the right wages, and not just give them. I mean, usually garment sectors have different various wages, like, it could be $2 to $6 a day. So that's nothing for an artisan. And I think $2 is just pretty much he has to manage at least 6 to 8 people of his family. But for us, seeing that and kind of understanding that whole process, for us, it was giving them a whole package of why that luxury product needed that support and artisan made products. So we kind of had this exchange of giving them the right wages and treating them with the right way of what needs to be given them, and giving them the right way to work and how it kind of create that product in with integrity. So I think it's the entire package totally. So yeah.
So amazing. Please keep up the incredible work that you're doing. So we're going to move on as we begin to wrap up we have some audience questions for everybody. The first one is, as brands have significantly increased their digital footprint through e-commerce, how do you think brands can maintain global consistency while still being relevant to their local customers in the brick and mortar stores? So I think it's how do they, if they're being exposed to a global audience, how do they still stay relevant to maybe in their local towns or things like that?
Yeah, I think that, and it's not just I think part of the fashion industry, but I think there's a certain play of localization that needs to take place. You could call it the Hard Rock Cafe t-shirt, right? The Hard Rock Cafe New York, Hard Rock Cafe Chicago, Hard Rock Cafe LA. These large global brands, they have to tap artists, they have to tap designers, they have to tap products that I think speak to the local community. And again, that's fits, that's influencers, that's campaigns. As big as it is, there has to be, certainly areas of relevance that these global brands need to speak to. I don't even think you could arguably have a global campaign anymore. I think the concept of it is probably fading, if not faded, in that there's so many groups and communities that make up a brand or a brand's consumer base, that they all need to kind of be spoken to or shared with in a variety of different tailored ways. Just knowing from my involvement in designing the customization studio at Puma in New York City, which is an 800 square foot physical space where we only do customization. We bring in young designers, young brands, artists to lead workshops on customizing apparel, footwear, accessories. In that store alone, we spend a significant amount of time really just trying to speak to the New York customer. It's not trying to get tourists, because there are no tourists during COVID. It's really speaking to New Yorkers. Keep in mind, Puma is a German company. And so we have to really find the right people. Why is the Puerto Rican Day Parade so important to New Yorkers? What about the marathon? And again, it's really about New York, celebrating food. I had to put in a coffee experience into the flagship on Fifth Avenue. And I wasn't going to go get Starbucks or anybody else. It had to be a New York coffee. So I brought in Birch, which is homegrown, 2 entrepreneurs, 9 shops. So it's examples like that I think these global brands really do need to think through their footprint. While they're a global operator, they really need to sustain themselves by creating these hyper local communities. And that's not just physical too. I think that also is part of their digital footprint equation as well.
Excellent. And as we shift as retail shifts to digital, what do you foresee is the top 3 challenges brands will face in the retail sector?
I think wholesale is what I think the brands will really struggle. And I think we will still struggle because I think there's a lot of, I mean, if we don't have customers to buy, then obviously it's just coming back to the buyers and, we will not get the same orders. So I feel that's going to be changing a lot. And that's why, digital comes in place a lot and presenting that as a store. But I think that's going to be there for some few years going forward. So yeah.
Nicole, Matthew, do you have any insights in the top 3 challenges, if you can think of those?
I would say one of the top challenges is just cutting through the noise. There's a lot of noise online. It's the digital noise, and it's how do you cut through it? How do you make an impact, and how do you make a connection and deepen that relationship? And how does it continue to evolve? And how do you use digital to your benefit from that perspective too, and try to have that human touch. One of the things that Marco Pizzari, the CEO of Gucci, has said is in many of his panel discussions and such, is that when they're looking at technology to implement, whether it's in store or online and such, it's really about making sure it represents the legacy of the brand. It's about the experience, but it's also about that human touch and that connection, and that a lot of brands, especially luxury brands, are not looking at for commoditized technologies, right? So when someone is making that move to digital and such, it's just really looking at all the different elements that are out there. But the biggest challenge, I would say, is how do you remain to have that community, that human touch and connection, and also how do you cut through the noise?
Absolutely. And Nicole, we have a very specific question for you with Modern Mirror is how is the elasticity of the fabric factored into the virtual fit?
Absolutely. Well, what we do with ours is we just don't put it in there's some companies out there that just scan the garment and it is a 3D and then they try to drape it onto the system. We actually don't do that. Part of our process, just to quickly walk through it, is so we'll take either a traditional pattern, which is a paper pattern, and we will actually digitize that for the client with our portable system, or we'll take their 2D or 3D CAD pattern, and so that has all of the notches and everything on it. So we know how that needs to be simulated. So we simulate that in our program as well. But when it comes to the fabric and those details and the beading and such, one of the things that we have is an actual fabric scanner. It's a very high-end fabric scanner with X-ray. And what we do is we actually will scan the fabrics in as well, and that pulls up all the properties of the fabrics and such. Actually, a lot of car manufacturers use them as well. So that's where we're really trying to make sure that we get those properties, because it is true, is those, we need to make sure that we can identify and get those proper properties and features, because that is also going to affect the movement, that's going to affect the draping, that's going to affect the fit. So from that sense, we gather that information with some of our systems too, actually with the Noe Bernicelli. Just on a side note, those, that beading and such can't be done in regular systems. We've actually broken some of the current systems in the marketplace. When I mean break, I mean we've pushed it past its capacity with some of the 3D CAD programs. So we've actually had to identify and create our own workflows and processes as well to create beads outside, like beading and zippers and all kinds of stuff outside of there, and then then going ahead and making sure that we simulate that and on the proper drape and such, so we get the proper movement. If that makes sense. So hopefully I answered that question for them, but it's quite a lengthy process that we do go through. We have made it efficient. We've got a lot of efficiency with it, but it's, and also that's where some of our fit mapping as well comes into place, is to be able to show where, on places on the garment it's tight, where it's maybe loose, where there's a lot of fabric as well. And then exactly where, if it's not going to fit, the system really shows you and tells you things like that.
Great. And not sure if you could answer this question, but have you seen during the pandemic, has counterfeiting of luxury brands and major brands, has it increased or decreased during the pandemic?
Well, I don't know if I would, I guess it's counterfeiting. A room full of lawyers, it's counterfeiting. And I'm a lawyer, but I try to be more creative than lawyerly. I will tell you that the fashion industry, at least the streetwear segment of the fashion industry, and by the way, streetwear has become, a completely, fast rocket ship of the fashion segment, influencing, most of the LVMH brands, influencing a lot of the Kering brands, from graffiti artists, typography, cuts, fits, who's been put in place as leaders. They have all kind of had a pedigree at some point recently in the last 5 to 6 years in streetwear. In streetwear, replica is what they call it, is very hot. It's very hot because some of it is, yes, there is a chance that people can be fooled into believing that you spent full price on a authentic Gucci or Balmain or Balenciaga shirt. So there is some of that. The other half of it is being treated like an art form now. Replica apparel is running rampant because anyone with a screen printer can basically print out a Rolex or Saint Laurent t-shirt, by the dozens every hour. And that's because on the other side, people want them. They love them. It's part of the culture now. It's not so much that again, I think I would almost say it's, back in the day, you go down to wherever street, Canal Street, and buy fake goods because you couldn't afford the real goods. I would say today it's 50-50. You're buying it, sure, because many of you can't afford the real thing, but the other half do it as the artwork. They support the artist who's turned the Rolex logo upside down and has added their own personal touch to it. Or archival luxury. Anyone on Etsy that sells a Goyard Apple Watch band basically took a garment bag of Goyard that's 20 years old and cut it up and made 50 Apple Watch bracelets or Apple Watch bands. So archival luxury being recycled, kind of also gives people this entrance point of owning a Goyard product for $70, right? That's what an Apple Watch band costs, not $7,000. So I think it is a counterfeit in many instances of just purely using the trademark illicitly. I do think has certainly increased, but also I think its place in just the culture from an artistic canvas has also increased, because people want to use it more often as, again, a backdrop for something else creative, or they use it as a reference point. So yes, the answer is yes. I don't see it stopping. I think that Well, Louis Vuitton, and at the head of Louis is Virgil Abloh, who came out of creating tons of replica stuff out of Rockford, Illinois, as well as working with Kanye, is not going to go after suing every designer in Brooklyn or Crown Heights that's making, Louis t-shirts. It's different than the China counterfeiting machine that was costing billions of dollars of revenue. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I don't think it's going to stop, I think, in the near future.
Wonderful. And just to wrap up, we have a lovely question. I think one that everybody wants to know is, when do you see the industry back full force, and what do you see as not going away?
I'll go. I think I don't know what back in full force means. If you believe a bunch of the stuff we hear on science and stuff, I think that we should I believe we'll have a great holiday season, whatever that means, whether that's a physical retail selling season or back to the same e-com. But I think people are getting confident. The industry and retail workers are going back to work, so they have income. I think a lot of the efficiencies of being digital and e-com will remain. I do think that, having retail in-store meetups and community and shows or presentations, I think will also start back up. So I'm bullish. I'm glad that, I'm not in the concert business, because I don't know about concerts anytime soon or festivals. But I do think in fashion, probably, another 6 to 9 months of steady vaccinations and some travel and some great results will allow the community to kind of reconvene physically and continue on.
Paul, Rupa?
I feel wholesale is just picking up because we're just seeing the numbers. What we had earlier last year, the numbers of wholesale orders were much lower. But I think what I'm seeing and what I'm understanding and the communication that we are having through different wholesalers, I think there are opportunities that are going to start for retail. I feel it's also it's going to start from spring and goes on, but it's not like a full-fledged, but I feel it's just picking up. I think over the end of this year, I think we feel it's going to come back, but again, it just depends on everything what's happening. But yes, there are jobs that we can be able to give back and still keep everybody in place and still be able to run the business and everything. But it's not like that we don't have any orders today it was early last year, but it's much better. So yeah.
And I'll just add to what Matthew said as well about physical stores and the meetups and the community and such. With when the brands that we're talking to and looking at deploying pop-ups and stuff, a lot of them are wanting to have physical activations. Yes, they're a little bit worried of how would a physical activation work for pop-ups and stuff, but they're pushing through and they're moving forward and they are being a bit bullish as well. And again, so we'll see more of that as well happen this year, where they're becoming more comfortable, and we started to already see that as well this past, not this, last fashion week or months, is that we started to see them as well go back to some brands go back to physical fashion shows and such. So we'll see that. And then as Matthew, just to reiterate, is what Matthew said is, yeah, those certain practices and digital practices and such. And as we described before, the 3D, more designers doing 2D CAD and 3D CAD and a little bit less on physical samples and such. We'll start to see that continue as well as we move forward. But one thing I will note, and what we've been approached by as well with some of these large brands, is they've realized is that no one's invincible. And the thing is we had this pandemic, and some of these brands that have been around, like Hermes has been around since 1837, and Louis Vuitton 1850s and so on and so forth, and Gucci 1920s.